we good? Are we good? How many people are online? So, let's go. Are we excited? Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first Open Cloud Summit, virtual event for Middle East and Africa. My name is Adiran. I'm the open source lead for Middle East and Africa. I'm going to host with you this great day. We're going to focus a lot on the great contributions and projects we're hosting on Azure as part of our open source commitment. We'll have great stuff for developers, for infrastructure guys, for data guys. Next 2 hours, we're going to learn a lot on what you can do with open source on Azure. So hopefully you've got to see this. Microsoft loves open source. It's been a journey for us at Microsoft really to embrace open source both internally and publicly. We've done a lot during this past 4 years to contribute and innovate with open source and the community and celebrate the great achievements that we can do when we partner together with the open source community. I want to share with you some of the momentum and figures around what Microsoft is doing with open source today. More than 7,000 components are already integrated from open source into Azure. We have about 10,000 employees working on open source components as part of the day-to-day job within Microsoft, and 3,800 components that we've released to the open source community as part of what we're doing here in Microsoft. But I think the number I'm most proud of is really looking at how Azure is built today. More than 50% of what we're running on Azure is actually coming from the Linux and open source ecosystem. That is great for a company that built Windows to see such a great momentum around open source. And of course, we have to mention our crown jewel. We've just bought GitHub, the leading open source platform for developers all around the world. This is now part of our Microsoft family for open source, and we've really committed into making this bigger and better as we go. Open Cloud Summit is all about exploring what we can do as part of our open source strategy. We decided to divide it into 3 focus areas that we on Microsoft and the product groups are focusing on. The first one is the Linux infrastructure and the databases. A lot of stuff that we're doing to take Linux, both from the infrastructure and the database perspective, into the cloud era. The second piece is around cloud native development, how we can scale our cloud competencies and developers into working with cloud native today. The last piece is around artificial intelligence, really doubling down on the OpenAI platform and all we can do to drive new insights from our data. The first piece we're going to focus on is Linux and open databases and how we can work with them when we're thinking about the cloud era. The first piece is around supporting key Linux distributions on Azure. We've worked really hard to make all of the key distros for Linux on Azure run as best as we can. From partners like Red Hat, SUSE, and Oracle, into distributions like Ubuntu, Chorus, and Debian, you can see multiple versions and a lot of focus areas for us to make sure that Linux is running best as we can on Azure. We currently have the most comprehensive resiliency and best SLA for Linux workloads. When we're talking about single VM, we can provide protection with premium storage. When we're talking about availability sets and availability zones for Linux, we're getting protection from an entire data center failures and providing 4 nines of VM SLAs. Obviously, when we're working with region pairs, we can work with protection from disaster and data resiliency compliance. Additionally, we're offering free Azure cost management for spending control around Linux. When you're migrating Linux into Azure, you can monitor cloud spend, you can drive organizational accountability, and optimize cloud efficiency for all of the Linux distributions. You can also use reserved instance analysis to understand when you can be more efficient and spend less money on running Linux on Azure. Another great focus areas for us is the open databases that are supported as part of our Azure commitment. We've seen all of the managed community from MySQL, Postgres, and MariaDB becoming an integral part of what we're doing on the Azure databases. We're providing elastic scaling with built-in high availability and combining it with security and compliance for your existing databases. This is being done with an industry-leading global reach, so you can integrate all of your open source components and databases into Azure. From the managed community versions, we're supporting automatic updates, automatic security fixes, and automatic new feature updates, so you can focus on your apps and leave the management of your databasing and patching it to us. You can see the versions of MySQL, Postgres, and MariaDB that we're currently supporting, and we're advancing as the community advances on innovation. We can scale those databases in seconds with built-in high availability. You can scale compute and storage as demanded and stay up and running without the need for additional replicas. You can rely on easy and cost-effective disaster recovery set up with a single click using Azure and those databases. Security and compliance are at the heart of what we're doing when we're talking about databases. We're protecting your data with an up-to-date security and compliance feature using Azure IP Advantage. We're controlling access with security like SSL, firewall roles, and VNet. We're building encryption for data and backups in motion and at rest. And most importantly, we're providing leading compliance offering like SOC, ISO, CSA, HIPAA, PCI, and more. A great feature that you can use when migrating those databases into Azure is the performance recommendation analysis for your MySQL and MariaDB databases. We can create index recommendation suggestions to allow you to accelerate the most frequently run on-time consuming queries. You can see all of that as part of our Azure Portal performance recommendations. The second piece we're going to talk about is the cloud-native development. Open source is truly a driver for what cloud-native is doing today. From containers to Kubernetes, from serverless to functions. Most of what we're doing in cloud-native is based on open source projects, and what we're doing is part of the community and the ecosystem. But managing too much containers on the same host can be hard. If you're not doing it correctly, your ship might sink. Azure Kubernetes Service is our orchestrator for containers. It allows you to ship faster, operate easily, and scale with confidence when you're running Kubernetes on Azure. That allows you to accelerate containerized development and run anything, anywhere. Microsoft's contribution to Kubernetes are significant. Microsoft was recognized as a top code contributor for Windows support in Kubernetes. We have thousands of monthly downloads for Helm, with more than 68% of Kubernetes users prefer choosing this project. Microsoft is one of the 3 top corporate contributors for Kubernetes, with 3x growth of employees contributors in the past 3 years. When we're comparing do-it-yourself Kubernetes to managed Kubernetes, there's a lot of areas when we can focus more on innovation than infrastructure. Managed Kubernetes empowers developers to achieve more. Instead of focusing on infrastructure, we're focusing on innovation. While when you do it yourself Kubernetes, you have to handle containerization, CI/CD, cluster hosting, patching, and scaling by yourself, AKS actually does it for you. We can do cluster hosting, cluster upgrade, patching, scaling, and monitoring as part of the managed Kubernetes service. We're also automating great parts of the CI/CD, application iteration, and containerization of everything you're doing within AKS. Another great platform we've just launched as part of our AKS is OpenShift by Red Hat. OpenShift takes the regular Kubernetes release and does hardening to become the trusted enterprise Kubernetes that Red Hat offers. OpenShift on Azure allows for certified container ecosystem, 9 years enterprise lifecycle management, and self-managed and hosted service delivery options. Red Hat has been a leading Kubernetes contributor since day one. In our developer track, you will see a lot of our contribution to the community. Great projects like Helm, Duffel, Kata, Draft, and more are part of our packaging, distribution, scalability and control, and Kubernetes developer tooling that we have partnered to offer to the community. The last piece we're going to talk about is distributed databases and OpenAI. Open source has been contributing to machine learning and AI since the beginning. A lot of the innovations that we're seeing happening today within the community is coming from the open source. Microsoft is doing a lot to make sure that AI will be open for everyone within the community. 2 years ago, we've introduced Azure Cosmos DB, a global distributed, massive, scalable, multi-model database service. We're supporting Table AI, Cassandra, SQL, MongoDB, Gremlin, with a key value or column-friendly document or graph. You can do whatever you want within Cosmos DB. You can get global distribution, elastic scale, and guaranteed low latency at the 99th percentile. We've also recently introduced MongoDB Atlas on Azure, a database as a service from MongoDB, with a self-service elastic and automated Mongo platform, and a global and high availability provided by MongoDB and Azure. Another great partnership is with Microsoft and Cloudera. After the merger of Hortonworks and Cloudera, we've partnered with the new company to provide unified services that leads for a modern platform. This allows you to do AI, machine learning, and advanced analytics on existing and new data collected as part of your Azure platform. Between Cosmos DB, MongoDB, Cloudera on Azure, and our great ML offering, we're able to provide the best platform for AI offered anywhere in the cloud. There's a lot more to cover, but I hope that gave you a taste of what we're doing on open source on Azure. This is our open cloud strategy focusing on infrastructure, developers, and data scientists. In the next 2 hours, we will be divided into tracks: developers, data scientists, and infrastructure guys, and drill down into the best features of what we can offer from open source on Azure. I hope you will have a great time learning about all of the cool stuff we're doing with open source on Azure. We'll be live here on the chat window, so feel free to ask, brainstorm, provide feedback, and give us every idea that you have on how to make open source better on Azure. On behalf of myself and the entire open source team, I want to thank you for joining us today and hope you will have a great time in the rest of this summit.